I'm holding a crumpled airplane ticket in my hands right now. One way to Portland, Oregon. It belonged to my son Jake, and I found it 6 months after he vanished into thin air. The date on this ticket? The day after he asked to borrow my car for just one day. If you've ever had a child disappear, not kidnapped, not hurt, but voluntarily evaporate from your life like they never existed, then you know the special kind of hell I'm about to describe. If you haven't, pray you never do. But before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps give me the strength to speak my truth. Now let's get into my story. The last words my son said to me were a lie. Just one day, Mom. I'll have it back tonight. That was 6 months ago. 6 months of sleepless nights, of calling his phone until the voicemail box was full, of driving through neighborhoods at 2 a.m. hoping to catch a glimpse of my Honda Civic, or him. Started so simply. Jake came home on a Tuesday, which was unusual because he'd been staying at his girlfriend's place more often than not. He was 23, working part-time at a warehouse, and honestly our relationship had been strained. Ever since his dad and I divorced 2 years ago, Jake seemed angry at the world but especially at me. I was making dinner when he walked into the kitchen, barely looking up from his phone. His hair was longer than I'd seen it, and he had this new tattoo on his forearm that I pretended not to notice. We'd been walking on eggshells around each other for months, and I didn't want to start another argument about his life choices. Mom, can I borrow your car tomorrow? He asked, still scrolling through whatever was so important on his screen. Just for the day. Mine's making that weird noise again. His car had been making weird noises for 6 months, but Jake never had the money to fix anything. The warehouse job barely covered his rent and his other expenses. Expenses I tried not to think too hard about. I'd offered to help with the car repairs before, but he always got defensive, said he could handle his own problems. I should have said no. God, I should have said no. But when your child asks you for something, even when they're grown, even when they've been distant, you want to help. You want to believe that maybe this small gesture will rebuild whatever's been broken between you. Sure, honey, but I need it back by evening. I have work Thursday. He nodded, gave me this quick, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Of course. Just one day. That night, I heard him on the phone in his old room, talking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out the words, but his voice sounded different. Urgent. Maybe even scared. I knocked on his door to ask if everything was okay, but he said he was just talking to a friend about work stuff. When I passed by later, the room was quiet, and I could see the blue glow of his phone screen under the door. Wednesday morning, Jake was up early. I mean really early. I heard him in the shower at 5 a.m. When I got up for work, he was already dressed, standing by the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee and a small backpack I'd never seen before. You're up early for someone who just needs the car for the day, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Yeah, well, I've got a lot to do. He avoided my eyes, which wasn't unusual, but something felt different. There was an energy about him, like he was buzzing with electricity or nerves. I handed him the keys, and for just a moment our fingers touched. His hands were cold, and I noticed they were shaking slightly. Jake, is everything okay? You seem. I'm fine, Mom. Really. Just tired. He grabbed the keys and headed for the door. I'll have it back tonight. That was the last time I saw him. Thursday came. No Jake. No car. His phone went straight to voicemail immediately, not even ringing first, which meant he'd either turned it off or the battery was dead. I called his girlfriend, Sarah, around noon. Oh, we broke up, she said, like she was telling me about the weather. 3 days ago. Haven't heard from him since. Broke up? But you two were. Look, Mrs. Martinez, Jake's been acting really weird lately. Like weirder than usual. He kept talking about needing to get away, needing space. I thought he meant from me, but maybe he meant from everything. The pit in my stomach grew deeper. What do you mean weird? Weird how? Just paranoid, I guess. He kept checking his phone, looking over his shoulder. Said he felt like people were watching him. I figured it was just stress from work or whatever. But she trailed off. But what, Sarah? I think he might have gotten mixed up with some bad people. He had money sometimes, more than he should have from that warehouse job. And he'd disappear for hours without explaining where he'd been. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the empty spot where my car should have been parked. The rational part of my brain said to give him another day. Maybe he'd met someone. Maybe he'd decided to take a spontaneous trip. But the mother part of my brain, the part that had worried about him every day since he was born, knew something was very wrong. By Friday I called the police. The officer who took my statement was probably younger than Jake, and he looked at me with that particular brand of patience reserved for overreacting parents. "Ma'am, your son is 23 years old. He's an adult. And you gave him permission to take the car." But he said one day, "It's been 3 days. Has he ever done anything like this before?" I had to think about that. Jake had always been impulsive, especially after the divorce. He'd disappear for weekends without telling me where he was going. But this felt different. Not exactly like this, no. The officer made some notes. "Look, we can file a report, but honestly this sounds like a family matter. Young adults need space sometimes. He'll probably show up when he runs out of money." But days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months. I reported the car stolen, but when I explained it was my son who took it, they basically shrugged. The detective assigned to the case, a tired-looking woman named Rodriguez, told me that adult children who disappear voluntarily are not a priority. "He's not missing, Mrs. Martinez. He left." There's a difference. But what if something happened to him? What if he's hurt? Has he contacted you at all? Any sign that he's in distress? No, but then our hands are tied. If he wanted you to know where he was, he'd tell you. I had to buy a used car just to get to work. The salesman, a greasy guy named Chuck, tried to convince me to get something newer, more reliable. "You don't want to be stuck on the side of the road," he said, patting the hood of a bright red sedan that cost twice what I could afford. But I couldn't bring myself to buy anything nice. It felt like giving up, like accepting that Jake wasn't coming back. So I bought the cheapest thing on the lot, a 15-year-old Corolla with a dent in the passenger door and a radio that only picked up AM stations. I filed a missing person report, even though Detective Rodriguez made it clear it was pointless. I hired a private investigator with money I didn't have. A former cop named Bill who charged me $200 to tell me that Jake hadn't used his credit cards or accessed his bank account since the day he disappeared. "Either he's using cash only or someone else is taking care of his expenses," Bill said during our one and only meeting at a Denny's near his office. What does that mean? Could mean a lot of things. Maybe he's got a friend helping him out. Maybe he got involved with people who don't like paper trails. What kind of people? Bill shrugged and stirred sugar into his coffee. "The kind you don't want your son involved with." I joined Facebook groups for parents of missing adults and learned words I never wanted to know, like voluntary disappearance and adult runaway. I read stories from other parents whose children had vanished, and I realized how common it was, how many families were walking around with these enormous holes in their lives. There was Linda, whose daughter had been gone for 3 years after getting involved with a cult. There was Marcus, whose son had disappeared after a gambling problem got out of control. There was Janet, whose daughter had left a note saying she was joining a commune in Colorado and never made contact again. We shared tips about private investigators, about how to monitor social media for clues, about how to keep hope alive when the police stop returning your calls. But mostly we just shared our pain. The not knowing was eating all of us alive. I started checking obituaries in neighboring states. I called hospitals in a 50-mile radius, asking if anyone matching Jake's description had been admitted. I drove through parts of town I'd never been to before, looking for my car in parking lots and driveways, hoping to catch a glimpse of my son. The nights were the worst. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. convinced I'd missed a call from a hospital, or from Jake himself. I'd check my phone obsessively, scrolling through old text messages from him, looking for clues I might have missed. The last text he'd sent me was 2 weeks before he disappeared. "Running late for dinner Sunday. Start without me." I never did have dinner that Sunday. Jake had called an hour later to cancel, said something had come up with work. Now I wondered if that something had been the beginning of whatever led him to leave. I became someone I didn't recognize, paranoid, desperate, hollow. I stopped sleeping well. I lost weight. My coworkers started asking if I was okay. And I didn't know how to explain that my son had evaporated from my life like morning mist. My sister Carmen tried to help. She came over every Sunday with groceries and concern, telling me I needed to start living my life again. Maybe he needed to leave, Maria. Maybe this is about him growing up, not about you being a bad mother. But why wouldn't he just tell me? Why disappear like this? Because he's 23 and he's an idiot, Carmen said, with the bluntness that only sisters can get away with. Remember when you ran away to San Francisco when you were 22? Mom was worried sick. That was different. I called after 2 weeks. Jake might call too. You just have to be patient. But patience felt impossible when every day stretched out like a year. When every unknown phone number made my heart race. When every news story about young men in trouble made me wonder if it was him. I went to therapy. Dr. Kim was a kind woman who specialized in family trauma, and she tried to help me understand that I couldn't control Jake's choices, that his disappearance wasn't necessarily a reflection of my failures as a mother. Sometimes people leave because they need to figure out who they are outside of their family's expectations, she said during one of our sessions. But I never had expectations. I just wanted him to be happy. Your love can feel like expectations, even when you don't mean it that way. Sometimes the weight of being someone's child, especially when that parent has sacrificed a lot, can be overwhelming. I had sacrificed a lot. After the divorce, I'd worked 2 jobs to keep Jake in the same school district, to make sure he didn't have to change his whole life just because his father and I couldn't make our marriage work. I'd put off dating, put off my own dreams, put off everything to make sure Jake felt stable and loved. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe I'd loved him so hard that he felt suffocated. Christmas came and went. I bought Jake a present anyway, a new jacket I'd seen him admiring at the mall months earlier. I wrapped it and put it under the tree just in case. On Christmas morning, I sat alone in my living room, staring at that wrapped box and crying until I couldn't breathe. New Year's Eve, I drove to all the places Jake used to hang out. The arcade where he'd spent his teenage years. The park where I'd taught him to ride a bike. The Taco Bell where he'd worked his first job. I sat in each parking lot for 10 or 15 minutes, hoping against hope that I'd see him walk out, that this nightmare would end as suddenly as it had begun. But there was nothing. Just empty parking lots and the growing certainty that my son was gone, maybe forever. Then last week, I got a call from the airport parking authority. A bored-sounding man named Dave told me they'd found my car in the long-term parking lot. We've been trying to contact the owner for weeks, he said. It's been here so long we're preparing to have it towed. My hand started shaking. How long has it been there? According to our records, about 6 months. You'll need to come get it soon or we'll have to impound it. I drove there with my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. 6 months of questions were about to be answered, and I was terrified of what I might find. What if Jake was in the car? What if I couldn't even finish that thought. The parking attendant, a tired-looking guy in his 50s, led me through rows and rows of cars to Section G Level 3. The airport was massive, and I realized Jake could have been flying anywhere in the world. As we walked, I bombarded the attendant with questions. Do you remember when the car was parked? Did you see who left it? Lady, we get thousands of cars through here. I don't remember individual vehicles unless they're causing problems. But 6 months. Didn't anyone notice it had been here so long? We do sweeps every few months. Your car just got flagged in the last one. And there it was, my silver Honda Civic, covered in dust and bird droppings, looking like a ghost of itself. The tires were flat, and there was a parking ticket under the windshield wiper dated from 4 months ago. The attendant helped me jumpstart the battery. As the engine turned over, I felt this weird mixture of relief and dread. The car was here, but Jake wasn't. Inside, everything looked normal at first. His favorite coffee mug was still in the cup holder. There were some of his CDs scattered on the passenger seat, actual CDs because Jake was old-fashioned that way. But as I searched more carefully, I found things that told a story I didn't want to understand. In the glove compartment there was a plain ticket stub. One way to Portland, Oregon. Dated 6 months and 2 days ago, the day after he borrowed my car. There was also a handwritten note, folded up and tucked under the passenger seat like he'd hidden it there on purpose. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unfold the paper. The note was written in Jake's messy handwriting, in blue ink from a pen I recognized, one of the cheap ones we kept in the kitchen drawer. Mom, I'm sorry. I can't explain why I had to leave, but I had to. I'm safe. Don't look for me. I'll contact you when I'm ready. I love you, but I need to figure out who I am without everyone's expectations weighing me down. Take care of yourself. Jake. I sat in that dusty car in the airport parking lot and cried for what felt like hours. All this time I'd been imagining the worst, that he'd been hurt, kidnapped, killed. But the truth was somehow harder to accept. My son hadn't disappeared, he'd escaped. From what? I still wasn't entirely sure. From me? From his life here? From the person he thought he was supposed to be? There were other things in the car that painted a picture of those last few days. A receipt from a gas station near the airport, dated the morning he left. A crumpled piece of paper with a phone number I didn't recognize. An empty envelope with my name on it. Maybe he'd written me a longer letter and decided against leaving it. The drive home was surreal. The car smelled different, like airports and abandonment and secrets I might never understand. The radio was tuned to a station I'd never heard before, playing soft rock that Jake would have hated. Had he been listening to it that last morning, trying to calm his nerves? I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a long time, staring at my house. For 6 months I'd been living in this bubble of not knowing. Now I knew, and somehow the certainty was worse than the mystery had been. That night I called Carmen and told her about the car, about the note. She came over immediately with a bottle of wine and a box of tissues. "At least you know he's okay," she said, reading the note for the 3rd time. "Do I? This note is 6 months old. He could be anywhere now. He could be in trouble or hurt. Or..." "Maria, stop. You have to stop thinking like that. Jake is smart. He's tough. If he needed help, he would find a way to get it. But why Portland? He doesn't know anyone in Portland. Maybe that's exactly why he chose it. Maybe he wanted to go somewhere where he could start over completely. I'd been thinking about that ever since I found the ticket. Portland was about as far as you could get from our small Texas town without leaving the country. It rained there. Jake had always said he wanted to live somewhere with real weather, not just endless heat and humidity. Over the next few days, I found myself researching Portland obsessively. I looked up neighborhoods, job opportunities, cost of living. I even called a few homeless shelters, pretending to be looking for volunteer opportunities, but really hoping someone might recognize Jake's description. But Detective Rodriguez was right. If Jake wanted me to know where he was, he would tell me. The note made it clear that he needed space, that my love was somehow part of what he was running from. Dr. Kim helped me understand that this wasn't really about me, even though it felt like it was. Your son is trying to become an adult, and sometimes that means separating completely from family, even loving family, she explained. It doesn't mean you failed. It means he needs to prove to himself that he can survive without you. But I never made him feel like he couldn't survive without me. You didn't have to make him feel that way. Sometimes the very fact of your love, your support, your presence in his life can feel like a safety net he needs to remove in order to trust himself. I started going to a support group for parents of estranged adult children. It was a small group that met in the basement of a church, and everyone there had a story similar to mine. Children who had left without explanation, who had cut off contact, who had chosen to build lives that didn't include their parents. Margaret's daughter had joined a religious group and been forbidden from contacting family members. Tom's son had moved to Alaska and changed his name. Susan's daughter had gotten married and refused to invite her own mother to the wedding. "The hardest part," Margaret said during one meeting, "is accepting that love isn't enough sometimes. We think if we love our children enough, if we sacrifice enough, if we're good enough parents, they'll never want to leave us. But sometimes they have to leave us in order to find themselves." I started seeing a different therapist, one who specialized in ambiguous loss, the kind of grief you feel when someone is gone but not gone, when there's no closure because there's no ending. Dr. Sarah helped me understand that I was mourning not just Jake's absence, but the relationship I'd thought we had, the future I'd imagined for us. "You're grieving the loss of your role as his mother," she said. "Not because he's dead, but because he's chosen to become an adult without your involvement." "But I'll always be his mother." "Yes, but he may never let you be his mother again in the way you want to be. And you have to find a way to live with that possibility." Slowly, very slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I kept Jake's room exactly as he'd left it, but I stopped checking it every day to see if he'd come home. I started dating again, tentatively, carefully, but I started. I took a ceramics class. I volunteered at a literacy program. I tried to remember who I was before I became Jake's mother, before my whole identity got wrapped up in taking care of him. But I also kept the car running, kept the gas tank full. Just in case. Because here's what I've learned. Sometimes loving someone means letting them disappear. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your child is to stop searching and start waiting. And sometimes one day means something completely different to them than it does to you. I don't know if Jake will ever come home. I don't know if he's happy in Portland, or if he even stayed in Portland. I don't know if he thinks about me, if he misses our old life, if he regrets leaving the way he did. But I know he's out there somewhere trying to figure out how to be himself. And when he's ready, if he's ever ready, I'll be here. With a full tank of gas and all the time in the world. The hardest part of loving someone is learning when to let go. But maybe that's also the most important part. Maybe real love means giving someone the space to become who they need to be, even if that person doesn't include you. I still check my phone every morning, hoping for a text or a call. I still look for silver Honda Civics in parking lots, even though I know mine is safely in my garage. I still wonder what I could have done differently, what signs I missed, what words I should have said that might have made him feel like he could talk to me instead of running away. But I'm learning to live with not knowing. I'm learning that some questions don't have answers, and some stories don't have endings. I'm learning that sometimes the people we love most have to leave us in order to find themselves. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just how love works sometimes. You give everything you have, and then you give them the freedom to walk away from it. Jake borrowed my car for one day and disappeared for 6 months. But in those 6 months I learned something I never wanted to learn. That being a parent means loving someone enough to let them go, even when letting go feels like dying. The car is in my garage now, clean and ready. Waiting. Just like me.